After tirelessly picking up and testing the pills from one spatial ring after another, Tianyong finally sensed a change in his body upon consuming a pill from the 10th and final ring. At first, he braced himself, expecting a surge of spiritual energy, perhaps an increase in his cultivation or physical strength. However, what he experienced was something different, a sharpening of his mind. It was similar to the effects of the waterfall's water but more concentrated. His thoughts became clearer, more refined, as if a fog he hadn't even realized was there had been lifted. Every detail around him appeared more vivid, and his comprehension of his surroundings heightened, almost as if the strength of his divine sense had been amplified 100 times. Since the 10th spatial ring had pills that actually worked, Tianyong put it aside and apart from the other rings in case he needed them. Now that Tianyong was done with the spatial rings, there was only one thing left in the cavern that he could realistically do, which was to return to studying the engravings on the wall. After staring at the wall for days, Tianyong realized one thing, that everything in the cavern seemed to assist Tianyong or whoever was present in studying the engravings. The waterfall and pills increased his mental strength, allowing him to be sharper, more observant, and more perceptive. The cultivation bed sped up his cultivation speed, which would not just improve his mental capacity and strength but also increase his longevity, giving him more time to study the engravings. Everything points to the engravings on the walls, but what does it mean? Is it a cultivation technique? Maybe a martial technique? I have no clue. Ah, Han Zexian, why didn't you leave behind some clues for your successor? After a few more days, Tianyong took a break from the engravings and went to wash his face with the waterfall and then went on another cultivation session. This time, he spent a month cultivating and reached the peak of Divine Warrior. Normally, a cultivator must face a heavenly tribulation upon reaching a new major realm, but due to Tianyang's unique location, he did not have to face one. Upon reaching Divine Warrior, Tianyong learned Divine Gaze. Although most people would learn it a little later, Tianyong was able to learn it early due to the amount of treasures he'd consumed that boosted his senses. Once Tianyong grew accustomed to Divine Gaze, he decided to put it to use, scanning the cavern once more with his enhanced perception. As his gaze swept across the chamber, something caught his attention, something he hadn't noticed before. Once Tianyong grew accustomed to Divine Gaze, he decided to put it to use, scanning the cavern once more with his enhanced perception. As his gaze swept across the chamber, something caught his attention, something he hadn't noticed before. Huh, what's that? He muttered, his brows furrowing as his eyes locked onto the cultivation bed. At first glance, it appeared no different from before, perfectly shaped, exuding boundless spiritual energy. But now, under the scrutiny of Divine Gaze, he could see faint, almost imperceptible lines along its edges. It wasn't just a solid platform, it was hiding something beneath. Curious, Tianyong stepped forward and placed his palms against the smooth surface. Applying force, he pushed. To his surprise, the entire cultivation bed shifted. A low, grating sound echoed through the cavern as the platform slid away, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Curious, Tianyong stepped forward and placed his palms against the smooth surface. Applying force, he pushed. To his surprise, the entire cultivation bed shifted. A low, grating sound echoed through the cavern as the platform slid away, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Tianyang's heart pounded with curious anticipation as he reached inside to grab the only object hidden within. When he held it before his eyes, Tianyong could see clearly that the hidden object was an old, worn-out book. He wondered if it was a technique, but his eyes widened with surprise after reading the title of said book. The title was a single, simple word, and it was the word, diary. Tianyong wasted no time and opened the book to the first page, immediately reading its contents. Soon, Tianyong realized that the book contained vital information about the cavern, such as the herbs, identity, as well as the unknown pills, effects. Heavens! They were all longevity pills. No wonder why I didn't feel anything after consuming them. But Han Zexian was an immortal. Why would he need longevity pills when he already can live forever without them? Tianyang's question was answered as he read more of the Han Zexian's diary. Apparently, the engravings on the cavern walls contained information about a powerful and mysterious entity, one that might be omnipotent, an existence that held absolute control over the divine heavens. The words carved into the stone seemed to whisper secrets far beyond mortal comprehension, knowledge that transcended even the most powerful cultivators. However, there was a terrible price for attempting to decipher them. Any effort to understand these inscriptions would directly consume one's longevity. It wasn't just a warning, it was a curse woven into the very text itself. The engravings were not meant for the unworthy, and those who sought their meaning would pay the cost with the most precious currency of all, their lifespan. As Tianyong continued reading the diary, his vision blurred, and an overwhelming fatigue washed over him. His eyelids grew heavy, his limbs sluggish, as if an unseen force was siphoning his very essence. It didn't take long before Tianyong realized it wasn't ordinary fatigue but his longevity being drained. The diary wasn't just a record, it was cursed knowledge, just like the engravings on the wall. Every word he read came at a cost, and the longer he continued, the more of his lifespan was sacrificed. This curse was so powerful and unforgiving that even immortals, beings with seemingly infinite lifespans, were not immune to its effects. No matter how vast one's life force was, this curse would make them seem finite if they delved too deep into its knowledge. Just what kind of entity is so dangerous that even learning about it would shorten one's existence? Tianyong wondered out loud. As insane and perilous as it was, Tianyong couldn't suppress the burning curiosity rising within him. Even knowing the cost, even feeling his lifespan slipping away with every word, he couldn't stop. Despite the dangers, despite the risk of his own lifespan being drained away, he wanted to know. If the heavens sought to keep this entity a secret, then he would defy the heavens themselves. In order to continue reading Han Zexian's diary, Tianyong had to constantly replenish his diminishing longevity with longevity pills. Each of the longevity pills granted Tianyong 100 years of life. Although this may not seem like much at a glance, these pills were unique in the sense that they could be consumed endlessly. While most longevity pills could only be consumed once in a lifetime before their effects ceased, Han Zexian's longevity pills were an exception, they had no limit. As long as one had an endless supply, they could achieve eternal life. However, such pills were exceedingly rare and unimaginably valuable. Their creation required specific herbs, ones that were nearly impossible to find. These herbs could only thrive in the most harsh and unforgiving environments, where even the strongest cultivators would struggle to survive. Yet, the very same herbs, ones thought to exist only in the most extreme landscapes, were right here in the cavern, growing beneath the waterfall. It was clear that Han Zexian had concocted the longevity pills by himself using the herbs he'd grown. However, Tianyong was not an alchemist, so there was no way for him to utilize the herbs before him. This meant that once the supply of longevity pills ran out, Tianyong would not be able to acquire more. Fortunately for him, Han Zexian had left behind an immense supply of longevity pills, enough to increase his longevity by tens of millions of years. Yet, at the rate his longevity was being depleted, Tianyong wasn't sure the supply would last him until he could learn the secrets of the cavern. However, Tianyong didn't care and continued. Time slipped away like grains of sand through Tianyang's fingers. With his mind wholly immersed in Han Zexian's diary, he lost all sense of the outside world. 1 year, 10 years, 20 years. In what felt like an instant, 25 years had passed since Tianyong first set foot inside Han Zexian's cavern. During this time, Tianyong had managed to improve his cultivation to the peak of immortal ascension, and he'd also long finished Han Zexian's diary and was now studying the engravings on the walls. Just finishing Han Zexian's diary had cost Tianyong over 1,000,000 years of his lifespan. Yet, he felt no regret. The knowledge he had gained was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Through the diary, he had not only unraveled the mystery of Han Zexian's existence but also uncovered his purpose in the cavern. According to Han Zexian, he had somehow stumbled upon forbidden knowledge, information about entities so powerful they surpassed all mortal and even immortal comprehension. These entities not only controlled the divine heavens, but they could even be dictators of their universe. Han Zexian referred to these unfathomable beings as outer gods, entities beyond the reach of mortals, immortals, and even divine beings. Their very existence defied logic, and their power was so absolute that even the highest realms of cultivation could not comprehend them. Han Zexian became obsessed with these beings, dedicating the rest of his life to studying them. His desire to learn more eventually evolved into something far more dangerous. He sought to contact them. This pursuit led him to this very cavern, a place Tianyong had initially assumed belonged to Han Zexian. However, in truth, the cavern wasn't Han Zexian's creation, and the cultivation bed and engravings on the wall existed before Han Zexian's arrival. The only things that truly belonged to him were the herbs and the longevity pills. As for Han Zexian's tomb, while it was indeed created by Han Zexian, this cavern was never originally part of it. In truth, the cavern existed somewhere else entirely, and the tomb itself was nothing more than a method of transportation, a gateway that led here. Tianyong had suspected this from the very beginning, so he wasn't too surprised about it. Tianyong hoped to find a translation of the engravings on the walls, but Han Zexian never managed to decipher it, or so Tianyong thought, as the diary lacked any mention of it. Tianyong looked at the longevity pills and mumbled to himself, maybe Han Zexian actually managed to contact these outer gods, hence why he left his supplies here and disappeared. If Han Zexian had failed, it would have only been because his entire lifespan had been drained away from trying to decipher the engravings. However, the abundance of remaining longevity pills suggested otherwise. If he had perished from longevity depletion, he would have consumed every last pill. The fact that so many pills were still left behind meant Han Zexian hadn't met his end in such a way. After spending over a decade studying the engravings, Tianyong had begun to understand it. While he didn't decipher the words, he could somehow feel and understand them. It was a weird phenomenon that Tianyong couldn't comprehend himself. As time passed and the supply of longevity pills neared depletion, Tianyong at last grasped the true meaning of the engravings. Although the engravings didn't reveal any new information about the outer gods, they revealed something much more valuable, a method of contacting the outer gods. This engraving is actually a technique. One that lets me contact the outer gods. He clenched his fists in excitement. Perhaps Han Zexian actually managed to understand the engravings and fulfilled his goal of contacting the outer gods. However, as much as Tianyong yearned to contact the outer gods, a deep sense of unease held him back. What would happen to him if he succeeded? After all, Han Zexian had likely attempted it and succeeded, yet he was nowhere to be found. No body, no trace, as if he had been erased from existence itself. The unknown loomed before Tianyong, both tempting and terrifying. Despite everything, I am still stuck in this place, I might as well give it a try and see what happens. Tianyong sighed, his gaze lingering on the ancient engravings. He had uncovered forbidden knowledge, deciphered the truth behind the outer gods, and sacrificed an unimaginable portion of his lifespan. Yet, he remained trapped inside the cavern with no way out. Han Zexian's diary, despite its wealth of knowledge, contained no mention of a way to leave the cavern. Tianyong was no different from a caged beast, left with only two choices: to wait for an escape that may never come, or to take the risk and reach out to the outer gods. After spending days pondering about it, Tianyong decided to contact the outer gods. After deciding that he would contact the outer gods, Tianyong spent another few months learning the technique used to contact them. Once he was prepared, Tianyong sat on the cultivation bed, took a deep breath, and began muttering, "O ancient gods beyond the veil of reason, where time coils and the stars weep, heed my call. I invoke the nameless, whose shadows consume light, whose whispers unravel fate. Through the fracture of all that is, through the silence where even Tao crumbles, descend and make this world your own." However, nothing happened after Tianyong activated the technique and recited the summoning phrase. Frowning, he looked around, his brows slightly raised at the anticlimactic result. Did it fail? He muttered, half expecting some kind of reaction. Just as he prepared to attempt the ritual again, his vision suddenly went blank. A weightless sensation overtook him, and the cavern's familiar presence vanished. The very atmosphere shifted, becoming something utterly alien, something beyond anything he had ever experienced. He was no longer where he had been. The cavern, the engravings, the cultivation bed, all of it was gone. Instead, an endless void stretched before him, vast and incomprehensible. Tiny flickering lights dotted the darkness, resembling distant stars, yet they felt eerily different, as if they were watching him. Unbeknownst to Tianyong, he had been transported to the starry sky, a realm beyond the sky of the divine heavens and a place untouched by mortals or immortals at his time. Where am I? How did I get here? What happened to the outer gods? Tian Yang's voice trembled slightly as he turned, searching for any sign of familiarity in the boundless abyss. A moment of silence stretched across the void. Then, a voice, deep, profound, and utterly overwhelming, resounded through his very being. By outer gods, are you referring to me? The sheer weight of its presence sent shivers down Tian Yang's spine. Before him, an immense silhouette emerged from the abyss, its scale so vast that his mind struggled to comprehend it. If he were to compare his own size to the silhouette, it'd be like comparing an ant to an elephant. The figure bore the shape of a human, yet its form was anything but ordinary. 10 arms stretched outward, 5 on each side, exuding an aura of absolute dominion. Tian Yang's breath was caught in his throat. He had sought the outer gods. And now, he stood before one. An outer god, they really exist, Tian Yang swallowed nervously. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, but unfortunately, I cannot answer them at the moment. That said, since you are the first human to ever decipher my engravings, I shall grant you a wish. Tell me, what do you desire? Can you grant me any wish? Tian Yang asked after snapping out of his daze. The outer god did not respond, almost as if it deemed it was pointless to answer such an obvious question. After a brief moment of contemplation, Tian Yang finally spoke, his voice steady despite the overwhelming presence before him. I have only experienced losses throughout my life. Time and time again, I've watched everything slip through my fingers because I was too weak to protect anything. His fists clenched, not in anger, but in unwavering resolve. If I could have any one thing in my life, it would be power, the power to protect what I want to protect. However, with that said, his gaze hardened as he looked up at the towering entity. I don't want such power to be handed to me. There was no hesitation in his words. Therefore, what I want is talent, the talent to surpass everyone. This was not a request for mere strength. It was a demand for the right to forge his own path. After a moment of silence, the outer god spoke, so you wish not for strength but the chance to acquire the strength you desire, huh? What an amusing human. Then it continued, unfortunately, I cannot grant that wish. What? Tian Yang showed a puzzled frown upon hearing this, as he thought the outer god was omnipotent and could grant him any wish. I cannot give you what you already have. Although you may not be aware of it, you already possess such talents. That's ridiculous. If I had even a sliver of talent in me, I wouldn't have struggled so much. Tian Yang shouted, his voice raw with frustration, feeling like he was being mocked. You don't have to believe me. Regardless, I cannot grant you that wish. You may choose a different wish. Tian Yang sighed, I don't have another wish. You can grant me whatever you want. In that case, I shall grant you something I believe is befitting of your existence, the outer god declared, its voice reverberating through the endless abyss. Before Tian Yang could react, a golden light materialized in the vast darkness, its radiant light pulsing with an indescribable energy. It drifted forward, moving with an ethereal grace, as though drawn by fate itself. In the next instant, the star shot toward him. Tian Yang barely had time to process what was happening before it pierced into his chest, disappearing into his body. What did you just do to me? Tian Yang asked. That is for you to find out. Suddenly, a powerful ripple surged through the distant void, distorting the fabric of space itself. The presence was vast and ominous, something beyond Tian Yang's comprehension. The outer god's gaze shifted toward the disturbance. I shall end our conversation here, it declared. Just as the abyss began to tremble, the outer god's attention returned to Tian Yang for one last moment. This will not be the last time we speak, for it seems our existences are intertwined by fate. Until next time, human. Before Tian Yang could respond, the void around him collapsed. The starry abyss twisted, and his consciousness was forcefully pulled away, as though reality itself was ejecting him from this realm. When Tian Yang snapped out of his daze, he found himself back inside the cavern, seated on the cultivation bed just as he had been before, almost as if his encounter with the outer god was only a mere dream. After returning to the cavern, Tian Yang's body was immediately drenched in sweat. A crushing exhaustion weighed down on him, as if every fiber of his being had been wrung dry. His breath came in ragged gasps, his limbs trembling uncontrollably. Despite having accumulated over 1,000,000 years of longevity, his brief encounter with the outer god had drained nearly all of it away. Tian Yang, ignoring his exhaustion, hurried to the shelf and snatched the only spatial ring that still contained longevity pills. Inside, only about 100 pills remained, enough to increase his longevity by another 10,000 years. Without hesitation, he popped a pill into his mouth. As it dissolved, warmth spread through his body, and his vitality slowly stabilized. So that was an outer god, huh? Unbelievable. Despite just meeting one himself, Tian Yang still found it difficult to believe such a powerful entity could exist. Wait a second, that outer god claimed I was the first human to decipher its engravings. What about Han Zexian? What happened to him? Tian Yang had originally believed that Han Zexian had deciphered the engravings and successfully contacted the outer gods long before him, but he turned out to be wrong. This made Tian Yang wonder about Han Zexian's mysterious disappearance. However, Tian Yang didn't dwell too long on Han Zexian. As intriguing as the mystery was, there was something far more pressing at hand, his own predicament. Even after contacting the outer god, he was still stuck inside the cavern with no way out. With no other options, Tian Yang started searching every nook and cranny of the cavern. Though he had taken a quick look when he first arrived, he had only checked the obvious spots. Now, with no choice but to be thorough, he began a more careful search, hoping to find something he had missed before. However, even after looking through the entire place not once but twice, Tian Yang was unable to find anything. Just as he was about to give up, Tian Yang's gaze suddenly turned toward the only entrance to the cavern. There's no way, right? After a brief moment of stillness, Tian Yang turned toward the cavern's entrance. As he crossed the threshold, he found himself once more on the dark, winding path, the very same passage that had first led him into the cavern. However, there was something different about it. Sensing this, Tian Yang turned around and returned to the cavern. He started packing up just in case, taking the spatial rings and herbs he hadn't touched since arriving at the cavern and tossing them into the spatial ring. He wanted to take the cultivation bed with him, but with it firmly rooted into the ground. Regrettably, there was nothing he could do but leave it behind. Once he was prepared, Tian Yang returned to the passage and began traversing it without looking back. After several days, Tian Yang finally reached the end of the passage, where a brilliant light pierced through the darkness. A slow breath escaped his lips as relief washed over him, his steps quickening toward the long-awaited escape from the cavern's suffocating embrace. Meanwhile, outside the mountain, two Spirit King cultivators guarded the sealed entrance to the mountain that Tian Yang had disappeared into several decades ago. I don't get it. Why do the immortal clans insist on guarding this mountain? Do you know why? One of the guards suddenly asked, as he was never given the reason he needed to guard it. They didn't tell you. And why are you asking this now? We've been here for almost a decade. I don't know. Unbelievable. Anyway, there is someone inside this mountain that the immortal clans want to capture. What? There's a person inside this mountain. I heard this place hasn't been open for decades. And for the immortal clans to guard this place just to capture him, I can't imagine how he defended them. I can't either, but we will most likely never see this individual. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if he'd already perished inside. The guard halted his words but kept his mouth wide open when the sealed entrance to the mountain suddenly opened for the first time in decades. This. Tian Yang stepped out of the mountain the following moment, his eyes adjusting to the open sky as he raised an eyebrow at the sight of two cultivators standing before him with shocked expressions. He had entertained the possibility that the immortal clans might be lying in wait, yet it did nothing to deter him. If anything, he wanted them to be there so he could immediately begin his revenge. Are you two with the immortal clans or the 7 divine sword peaks? Tian Yang calmly asked them. In response, the guards unsheathed their weapons, the cold steel gleaming under the light as they leveled them at Tian Yang. Their expressions were tense, their stances rigid. Under the immortal clans, orders, we are to capture you. Do not resist, or we will take you in by force. I see. All right. You can take me. Tian Yang raised his hands and surrendered himself. The guards were pleasantly surprised by how smoothly it went. However, as they took a step toward him, Tian Yang suddenly activated Limitless Sword Domain, killing the two guards before they could even react. So they won't let me go even after so many years, huh? Good. Very good. This will make hunting them down even more satisfactory. Tian Yang laughed as he flew away from the scene. Meanwhile, Within the grand halls of the immortal Gu clan, a lone servant stood vigil over two luminous jade slips, their glow pulsing faintly in the dim chamber. For years, they had remained undisturbed, carrying the essence of their owners, until now. Without warning, the light within them flickered, faded, and then vanished entirely. A heartbeat later, both jade slips cracked, the fractures spreading like veins of death before they shattered into countless fragments. When the servant, who was half asleep, saw this, he hastily ran out of the room to report the news. Patriarch Gu of the immortal Gu clan sat in his secluded chamber, immersed in deep cultivation. The flow of qi around him was steady, his breath synchronized with the universe itself. Each inhale refined his power, and each exhale expanded his control over the profound energies of the world. Yet, in an instant, that harmony was shattered. A loud, urgent banging erupted against his door, the force behind it so jarring that it sent ripples through the qi in the chamber. His eyes snapped open, a flicker of irritation flashing across his face. Who would dare disturb him while he was cultivating? With a flick of his sleeves, the door flung open, and before the individual outside could so much as step inside or utter a single word, Patriarch Gu's voice exploded like thunder, reverberating through the halls with unrestrained fury. You better have a damn good reason for disturbing my cultivation, or I will feed you to the dogs. His piercing gaze locked onto the trembling figure before him, his presence suffocating. The servant immediately fell to his knees and reported in a trembling voice, "This lowly servant has urgent news to report. The soul-bound life jade of the two guards at Han Zexian's tomb had just shattered. The guards have been killed." What? Patriarch Gu instantly stood up in shock, with disbelief written all over his face. After the incident, the immortal clans kicked everyone out of Han Zexian's tomb and sealed it so that only approved individuals could enter. In other words, the guards' deaths were no accident, and only one individual could have done it. That bastard has finally stopped hiding and crawled out of his rat hole. Patriarch Gu's voice thundered through the chamber, his fury palpable. As he seethed, a strange sensation coursed through his left arm, the very same limb Tianyang had severed in their last encounter but was eventually healed with treasures. However, even having fully healed, he would often feel phantom pain where Tianyang had cut, a constant reminder of his humiliation. Unfortunately for Patriarch Gu, Tianyang had long left Han Zexian's tomb before he could arrive, something he realized before even entering the tomb, as the guards keeping watch of the entrance were lifelessly lying on the ground. Moreover, engraved into the very earth where the guards had fallen were the ominous words, "I have returned to kill all of you." The moment Patriarch Gu's gaze fell upon them, a chilling sensation washed over him. These were not mere threats, they pulsed with raw, unbridled killing intent, so thick it seemed to seep into the surroundings, staining the very air with malice. He could also feel the deep hatred embedded in every stroke, as if Tianyang had carved the message not just into the ground, but into the souls of those who would read it. Despite knowing that Tianyang was no longer inside the tomb, Patriarch Gu still entered it and traveled to the mountain. He wanted to confirm if the door was open now that Tianyang had come out. Unfortunately for him, the doors had closed shortly after Tianyang left. He left the tomb shortly after and contacted the other immortal clans, notifying them of Tianyang's return. After a deep slumber, Yuan woke up with a puzzled look on his face. Why did I see Patriarch Gu in that dream? He muttered out loud. He thought he was recalling Tianyang's memories, but if that were the case, he wouldn't have been able to see Patriarch Gu's reaction to Tianyang's return. This made him consider the possibility that he wasn't actually dreaming of Tianyang's memories but someone else. There was also the possibility that he wasn't dreaming of memories but something entirely different. However, Yuan had no clue what it might be. After pondering for some time, Yuan eventually set aside his thoughts and shifted his focus to the heaven-refining crystal. He had been feeding it his blood for over a year now, and the crystal looked a lot different than it did a year ago. When he first discovered it, the heaven-refining crystal had been plain and devoid of any distinct features. It was an ordinary, colorless crystal. But after absorbing his blood for over a year, it had undergone a profound change. Its once lifeless surface now shimmered with a vibrant spectrum of colors, shifting and pulsating like a living entity. More than just its appearance, the crystal emanated a unique aura, a profound energy that made Yuan subconsciously revere it. It's ready to move to step 2. After staring at the crystal for a brief moment, he pressed the crystal against his lips before pushing it inside his mouth, treating it as though it was a candy. Unlike pills, the heaven-refining crystal did not dissolve upon contact with his tongue. Yet, Yuan did not hesitate. With a single, deliberate motion, he forced the crystal down his throat, swallowing it whole. The moment it passed into his body, a violent reaction erupted within him. A tidal wave of energy surged through his meridians, scorching them like divine fire, threatening to tear him apart from within. His muscles tightened, his bones groaned under immense pressure, and his very soul trembled as if the crystal were trying to refine him instead. Erg! Yuan roared as unbearable pain racked his entire being. It had been a long time since he had experienced such agony. It was so intense it felt as if every fiber of his existence was being torn apart and reforged at the same time. The heaven-refining crystal, now a part of him, unleashed an uncontrollable storm of energy. His meridians twisted and expanded, his blood boiled as if ignited by flames from purgatory, and his very soul trembled. He struggled, his body convulsing, sweat pouring down like rain, but no amount of resistance could quell the sheer torment. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. His vision blurred, his strength waned, and eventually, his consciousness slipped